Stop being nice to a narcissist. Do this instead before it's too late. And I want to start with the before it's too late, because that phrase is doing something important in this title that goes beyond the urgency it is designed to create. Before it's too late is not hyperbole. It is a precise description of a real psychological window. A window that exists in every significant relationship with a narcissist, that has a specific opening and a specific closing, and that what you do inside that window determines something that extends well beyond the relationship itself. It determines something about who you are when the relationship is over, about what you have left to rebuild with, about how much of yourself remains intact and available for the life you are going to live after the relationship has run its course in whatever direction it runs. Because here is the thing about being nice to a narcissist, that the niceness itself makes almost impossible to see clearly from inside it. The niceness is not neutral. It is not simply the absence of conflict, the choosing of peace, the reasonable decision of a reasonable person to respond to difficulty with grace rather than with escalation. The niceness, in the specific context of a relationship with a narcissist, is a transaction, and the terms of the transaction are almost always the same, regardless of whether either party is conscious of them. You give the niceness is received as supply. The supply confirms the narcissist's sense of their own significance and their own right to be responded to with patience and consideration regardless of what they are doing. The confirmation reinforces the behavior that the niceness was responding to, and the behavior reinforced continues and often escalates, because the niceness has taught the narcissist's system that the behavior produces supply rather than consequences. You are not being nice. You are funding the dynamic that is diminishing you. And before it's too late is pointing at the moment when the funding has gone on long enough that the account it has been drawing from, the account of your own sense of self, your own clarity about reality, your own capacity for the self-referencing that genuine healing requires, has been drawn down so far that the rebuilding requires something considerably more than stopping the funding. Before it's too late is the invitation to stop the funding before you reach that threshold. And the instead is what you do with the energy that stopping the funding releases. So stay with me, because the instead is the entire point, and it is not what you think. Let's start with what being nice to a narcissist actually does at the psychological level, where the effects are most significant and most rarely examined. Because most people who are being nice to a narcissist have a model of what the niceness is producing that is sufficiently inaccurate to be the primary reason the niceness continues long past the point where any honest assessment of the evidence would have ended it. The model is something like this: if I continue to respond with patience and kindness and the benefit of the doubt, the narcissist will eventually recognize the quality of what they are being offered and respond in kind. The niceness will model something, will demonstrate something, will create the conditions in which the narcissist's better nature, which the niceness is predicated on the existence of, has enough safety and enough positive reinforcement to become more consistently present. This model is not entirely without basis. It is the model that works in relationships with people who are responding to genuine difficulty with less than their best and who are capable, given the right conditions, of developing towards something better. It is the model that works when what is required is patience and the generous interpretation and the continued good faith of someone who understands that human beings are not at their best under pressure and who is willing to provide the conditions for their best to emerge. With a narcissist, this model does not work. Not because the narcissist is a fundamentally different category of being for whom the conditions that support growth in other people are irrelevant, but because the specific mechanism through which the niceness is received is not the mechanism the model assumes. The model assumes the niceness is being received by someone who is evaluating it as kindness and is being influenced by the evaluation. The narcissist system receives the niceness as supply, not as kindness that models something, as confirmation that the current behavior is producing the supply that the behavior is supposed to produce. The niceness does not create the conditions for growth. It creates the conditions for the continuation of what produced the niceness. Because what produced the niceness, from the narcissist system's perspective, was successful. It produced supply. And successful behavior, in any system organized around supply production, is reinforced rather than revised. This is the first thing that being nice to a narcissist actually does. It reinforces the behavior it is responding to. And most people who are being nice to narcissists know this at some level, have been told this at some level, have read something or watched something, or had a conversation with someone who has explained this dynamic with sufficient clarity that the knowledge is available somewhere in their awareness. But the knowledge alone does not stop the niceness, And the reason the knowledge alone does not stop the niceness is the second thing that being nice to a narcissist actually does. It maintains the self-image of the person being nice in a way that the alternative threatens. Because most people who are nice to narcissists are nice to narcissists specifically because being nice is genuinely part of who they are. The patience, the benefit of the doubt, the generous interpretation, the continued good faith, these are not performances or strategies. They are authentic expressions of a character that is genuinely organized around treating other people with consideration and care. And the proposal to stop being nice, to do something instead of the niceness, immediately activates the question of what the something is and whether the something is compatible with the person's genuine self-concept. Because the most obvious alternatives to niceness, the cold withdrawal, the pointed confrontation, the boundary enforcing that looks from inside a character organized around consideration, like cruelty, do not feel like the instead. They feel like becoming someone the person does not want to be. And this feeling, that the alternative to being nice is becoming something worse than the niceness is producing, is one of the most effective mechanisms through which the niceness is maintained long past the point where any objective assessment of its effects would justify continuing it. The niceness continues because the alternative feels like a betrayal of the self, and the instead that this episode is about is specifically designed for the person who feels this, who knows the niceness is not working, and who cannot find a version of the alternative that does not require becoming someone they not recognize. The instead is for that person, and it does not require becoming someone unrecognizable. It requires becoming more specifically and more completely the person the niceness has been preventing them from being, which is the most counterintuitive and most important thing this episode is going to offer. The instead begins with a distinction that most people in this situation have never had drawn clearly enough to actually use. The distinction is between niceness and genuine kindness. And before you dismiss this as a semantic distinction that does not change anything practical, stay with it for a moment, because the difference between these two things is the entire difference between the behavior that is funding the dynamic that is diminishing you and the behavior that is the most complete and most honest expression of who you actually are in this relationship. Niceness, in the context we are discussing, is the specific quality of response that is organized around managing the narcissist's reaction. It is the careful wording of the feedback that might otherwise produce a negative response, the suppression of the observation that would be accurate but would create conflict, the agreement with something you do not agree with, because agreeing is easier than the argument that disagreement would produce. The performance of being fine when you are not fine because the alternative, expressing that you are not fine, would require a response from the narcissist that the niceness is organized around preventing. All of this is niceness. And all of it is organized around the narcissist's emotional state, around managing the narcissist's potential reactions, around the prevention of the specific consequences that honesty would produce. Niceness in this sense is not kindness. It is conflict avoidance dressed as kindness. And it is maintaining itself not because it is genuinely consistent with your character, but because your character, the genuinely kind, genuinely considerate, genuinely good faith person you actually are, has been trained by the dynamic's consequences to suppress the honest expression of itself in favor of the version that produces fewer immediate negative outcomes. You are not being nice because you are a nice person. You are being nice because the dynamic has taught you that being honest is more costly than being nice. And that training, the specific, accumulated consequence-reinforced suppression of your genuine response in favor of the managed response, is the before it's too late. The instead begins with the recognition that what is being suppressed is not your potential cruelty, but your actual clarity. And the distinction between those two things is everything. Genuine kindness, as distinct from the niceness that is funding the dynamic, is organized around the truth rather than around the management of reactions to the truth. It is the honest observation offered with care rather than suppressed for the sake of peace. It is the disagreement expressed with respect, rather than swallowed for the sake of the relationship's immediate equilibrium. It is the boundary communicated clearly rather than implied apologetically. It is the feedback given specifically rather than softened into meaninglessness. Genuine kindness is not cold. It is not cruel. It does not require the abandonment of the consideration and the care that are genuinely part of your character. It requires the offering of those qualities in their most honest form, rather than in the managed form that the dynamic has trained you to substitute for the honest form. And the crucial difference between genuine kindness and niceness, in terms of what each one does in a narcissistic dynamic, is this: genuine kindness does not provide supply. Niceness, as we established, is received as supply because it confirms that the behavior is producing the desired response. Genuine kindness is not receivable as supply because it is not organized around the narcissist's emotional state. It is organized around the truth. And the truth, in the specific form that genuine kindness delivers it, is not supply. It is information. And information in the narcissist system is not the same category of experience as supply. It does not produce the regulatory hit. It does not confirm the significance. It does not reinforce the behavior. It introduces something that the supply-seeking system is not designed to process smoothly. The specific quality of being responded to as an actual person rather than as the occasion for supply production. And that quality, however uncomfortable it is for the narcissist system to receive, is more genuinely respectful of whatever actual personhood exists underneath the construction than the niceness that was confirming the construction and funding its continuation was ever managing to be. The instead is not the absence of kindness. It is the presence of the real thing. And the real thing, applied with consistency in a narcissistic dynamic, does something that the niceness was never doing, and that is the most important thing the instead is designed to produce. And that thing, and the specific ways it changes the dynamic, and what it changes about you in the process of applying it, and the specific moment before it's too late that the title is pointing at. That is exactly where we are going next. The thing that genuine kindness does in a narcissistic dynamic that niceness was never doing is this. It introduces accountability without aggression. And accountability without aggression is the specific combination that the narcissist system has the least available response to, because the available responses are all calibrated to address either the absence of accountability, which the niceness was providing, and which the system is entirely comfortable managing, or the presence of aggression, which gives the system something to work with, a threat to respond to, a conflict to reframe, a situation that can be converted into the narcissist's victimhood narrative with sufficient ease, that the accountability disappears in the process of managing the aggression. Accountability without aggression removes both of these available responses simultaneously. It cannot be ignored the way the niceness permitted it to be ignored, because it is specific and present and organized around the truth of what is actually happening in a way that the niceness was always organized around managing rather than stating. And it cannot be converted into the narcissist's victimhood narrative the way aggressive confrontation can be converted, because it carries none of the emotional charge that the conversion process requires. It is simply clear. Clear and present and kind in the genuine sense of being offered with care for the relationship's actual health rather than for the relationship's immediate comfort. And clarity, offered with genuine care and without the aggression that would give the narcissist system something to deflect toward, is the most specifically disorienting thing the narcissist's management system encounters. Because the management system's options, the dismissal, the contempt, the reframing, the victimhood narrative, the sudden vulnerability that redirects the conversation, all of these require something to push against. The niceness gives them nothing to push against and therefore requires no management. The aggression gives them something familiar to push against and manages easily. The accountability without aggression gives them something that their usual tools cannot adequately address, and that therefore requires the construction to do something it is not designed to do smoothly. To sit with a clear, specific, caring, accurate observation about its behavior without the usual escape routes being available. This is the core of the instead. And the instead in practice looks considerably less dramatic than most people expect when they hear the phrase "stop being nice." It does not look like confrontation. It does not look like the finally saying everything that has been suppressed conversation that the build-up of unexpressed observations tends to make the imagined instead look like. It does not look like the cold withdrawal that the abandonment of niceness tends to produce when niceness is replaced by its emotional mirror rather than by its genuine opposite. It looks like the ordinary expression of honest experience in the moments where the niceness would have suppressed it. It looks like responding to the dismissive comment with the simple, calm, specific observation that the comment was dismissive rather than absorbing the dismissal and continuing as though it did not happen. It looks like disagreeing with the reframe of what happened without the lengthy justification and the apologetic hedging that the niceness would have attached to the disagreement to make it more manageable for the narcissist. It looks like naming the pattern when the pattern is present, rather than treating each instance of it as an isolated incident that can be responded to with the patience and the benefit of the doubt that isolated incidents deserve, but patterns do not. It looks in every specific instance like the most accurate and the most honest version of your response to what is actually happening, offered in the tone of someone who genuinely cares about the relationship's health, without the performance of not caring that aggression produces, and without the performance of not noticing that niceness produces. It is the expression of the actual self in the actual moment, organized around the truth of the actual moment, rather than around the management of the narcissist's response to the truth. And here is what the instead does to you. Not to the narcissist, not to the dynamic, not to the relationship's immediate equilibrium, to you. Because this is the most important part of everything this episode is offering, and it is the part most consistently left out of conversations about how to deal with narcissists, because those conversations tend to be organized around the narcissist and what works on the narcissist, rather than around the person in the relationship and what works for them. The instead does something to you that the niceness was preventing. It returns to you the experience of your own voice, the specific, irreplaceable, not substitutable experience of being a person who says what they actually think and feels what they actually feel and expresses what they actually observe in the moment, when the observation is accurate, rather than the managed, suppressed, delayed until it is safe version that the niceness has been training. This experience, the experience of your own voice being present in your own interactions, is not a small thing. It is not a peripheral benefit of the instead that is worth mentioning alongside the more important strategic benefits. It is the primary benefit. It is the thing that the before it's too late is pointing at. Because the specific harm that being nice to a narcissist for long enough produces is not primarily the harm of the narcissist's behavior, however real and however significant that harm is. The primary harm is the gradual, accumulated, progressive dimming of the person who was there before the relationship trained the niceness into them. The slow loss of the specific, particular, irreplaceable voice that was expressing itself honestly before the dynamic made honest expression too costly to maintain. The before it's too late is not pointing at the relationship's deadline. It is pointing at the self's deadline. At the window before the trained suppression has gone on long enough that the voice itself has become difficult to access. Before the instead feels not just uncomfortable but genuinely foreign. Before the authentic response to the moment has been so thoroughly replaced by the managed response that the authentic response is no longer the first thing that arrives. The instead returns the voice before that happens. And the returning of the voice changes something in the dynamic that the niceness was incapable of changing regardless of how long or how consistently it was maintained. It changes the narcissist's information about who they are dealing with. We discussed in a previous episode how the narcissist builds and maintains an operational map of the people in their orbit. A specific calibrated, behavior-derived picture of who this person is and how they respond and what tools are most efficiently deployed against what vulnerabilities. The niceness built a map, a specific, detailed, reliable map that told the narcissist system exactly what to expect from you and therefore exactly what to do with you. The instead disrupts the map. Not dramatically, not all at once, but with a consistency and a specificity that the map cannot easily incorporate, because the map was built on the suppressed responses, on the data of someone who did not say what they noticed, who did not name what was happening, who absorbed the behavior without the honest reaction that accurate perception of the behavior would naturally produce. The instead is the honest reaction, and the honest reaction is data that the map was not built to contain. The map says this person absorbs. The instead says this person names what they notice. The map says this person agrees to manage conflict. The instead says this person disagrees when disagreement is accurate. The map says this person's responses are organized around my comfort. The instead says this person's responses are organized around the truth. And a map that is systematically contradicted by the territory it is supposed to represent is not a functional map. It is information that the narcissist system must process as the disruption it actually is, as evidence that the person they thought they were dealing with is not the person they are actually dealing with. In that disruption in the narcissist system produces exactly the kind of recalibration that the niceness was never producing. Not necessarily the change you hoped the niceness would eventually produce. Not the recognition of the pattern and the genuine desire to be different. The recalibration is more limited than that, but it is real. And the reality of it, the specific, system-level acknowledgement that this person is not operating on the expected parameters, is more genuinely influential on the dynamics functioning than the niceness ever managed to be. Now here is the part about what the instead does not do, because this episode would not be honest if it presented the instead as a solution to the problem of being in a relationship with a narcissist rather than as a response to one component of the problem. The instead does not fix the narcissist. The accountability without aggression, the genuine kindness, the honest expression of accurate observations in the tone of someone who cares about the relationship's health. None of this produces the narcissist's genuine change, because genuine change in the narcissist requires conditions and work and self-awareness that the instead cannot provide and was never designed to provide. The instead is not leverage for the narcissist's growth. It is not the approach that finally gets through in the way that the niceness failed to. The narcissist's genuine change, if it occurs at all, requires the narcissist's genuine engagement with the work that would produce it, and nothing you do in the relationship can substitute for that engagement or compel it, or even create the conditions in which it is more likely. The instead does not do that. What the instead does is this: it protects you. It maintains the connection between you and your own voice, your own clarity, your own accurate perception of what is happening, in the specific way that the niceness was severing it. It ensures that when the relationship ends, in whatever direction and at whatever time the relationship's trajectory takes it toward its ending, the person who emerges from it still has access to the self that entered it, still has the voice, still has the clarity, still has the specific, particular, irreplaceable person that the relationship's niceness requirement was in the process of replacing with the managed version that the dynamic found more comfortable. That is what the instead protects. That is what the before it's too late is pointing at, not the relationship, you. The specific, honest, clear-eyed, genuinely kind person you are when you are not organized around managing someone else's reaction to the truth of your experience. That person is worth protecting. That person is worth the discomfort of the instead. That person is what remains when the relationship has run its course. And what remains, if the instead was practiced before it was too late, is not someone who survived the relationship by managing it into a bearable form. It is someone who was present in the relationship, fully, honestly, accurately, and who therefore knows exactly who they are on the other side of it. And knowing who you are on the other side of it is not a small thing. It is the only thing that makes the other side worth arriving at. It is the before it's too late fulfilled. And it is available to you right now, in whatever moment you are reading this, in whatever relationship you are currently navigating, not as a dramatic gesture, as the next honest response to the next moment that deserves one. Start there. That is the instead.